So when I entitled this "The Unfortunate Truth About Rhetorical Studies," I was realizing after 30 years of intense labor trying to revive interest in the rhetorical arts and rhetorical studies that colleges, sure, there are rhetoric departments that are still out there, but the discipline has been so polluted by deconstructionism and Marxist theory and all of the popular trends in academia, social construction of knowledge, that it's really difficult to find rhetoricians who have a traditional viewpoint or a foundationalist perspective or a Christian worldview. So that's pretty good. Everyone see that fine? Okay. So anyway, I went off in that vein for quite a while, and then I turned it around and I talked more about the reasons why I felt the need to lament the degradation of the discipline that I love and that is traditionally considered the queen of the arts. Theology is the queen of the sciences. Rhetoric was known either as the queen of the arts or the harlot of the arts, depending on the era in which you discuss it. But and the longer I contemplate rhetoric and dwell on the vast riches of rhetorical theory and the ethics of rhetoric in particular, the more I realize that in the Christian curriculum and classical Christian education, rhetoric is rightly understood as the capstone, and it's implicated very highly in human excellence. And from a Lutheran perspective, when I taught here in this room for 3 years, I really tried hard to break it down for my students. I left academia and came here to be a headmaster and teach 7th and 8th grade. And I tried with everything I had to get them to understand how rhetoric, understood rightly, is very much like speaking the truth in love to my neighbor for his good, with his good in mind, to lead him toward the good, to help him improve as a human being. And that has a lot to do with vocation and the two kingdoms and Christian liberty. So if you start Lutheranizing your understanding of rhetorical arts, they're really, really important. And then to look across the landscape, even in classical Christian schools, and realize that there's a lot of indifference to it, there's a lot of perversions of it, and not too many people understand the value of it. So I've been trying for 30 years, like I said, to turn that around as much as I'm able. And now that I relocated from here to Austin, Texas, and I was looking around there are a lot of universities there, and I was looking around for something to do in my semi-retirement. I realized there's not a lot out there in terms of a traditional and ethical and noble view of the rhetorical arts. And that saddens me, because when you look at the state of our nation today, our society is so uncivil, and the discourse with the election of Donald Trump, I mean, it's manifest. The need to learn to listen to one another with empathy and precision and clarity, and then to respond to one another winsomely about ideas that affect us all, I think a lot of people are starting to realize we need to somehow get back to that sort of civil society. But as long as rhetorical arts are in such a state of disrepair, it's not going to happen. So it's kind of up to us. So I ended with the reasons why, the value of rhetoric, the ethics of rhetoric, what rhetoric really should mean in a classical Lutheran context, and what it has to do with vocation and loving one's neighbor and all of that. And then I solicit everyone's support there. And so that's where I'm going to start with this session. That's the thumbnail version. So this is going to be a much more positive session. And I announced at the end of the last one that it's kind of my last-ditch effort, I guess you'd say. It's I'm redoubling my efforts with the help of Wittenberg Academy and a debating society that one of my former students is overseeing. And they have a pretty good reach. They have about 700 people in their circles, and he does debate camps all over the nation. We're rolling out a thing, and we're actually going to trademark the term rhetorical intelligence. We're calling it the Rhetorical Intelligence Project. And I'm playing with the idea of multiple intelligences, emotional intelligence, because those are trendy buzzwords. But rhetorical intelligence, as I understand it, and that's what we'll talk about today, and it's not this. I was listening to Dr. Veith, and I thought about this, and I wanted to just project it for your general edification. We can talk about that if you want, but the whole idea, in fact, I see a thread in our plenary speaker as well about the rightly turned soul, the affections being rightly ordered and all of that. And that's a large part of right education. To be affected properly, well-turned soul. Anyway, rhetoric has a role in that for sure. But rhetorical intelligence, I would like to be understood in light of what Aristotle calls, or actually it was Paul Ricoeur who coined the phrase, the dianoetic virtues. The dianoetic virtues are the 5 intellectual virtues that Aristotle identified in the Analytics and the Nicomachean Ethics, and they are Sophia, love of wisdom, love of first principles, Sophia, episteme, or episteme, depending on who taught you, which is knowledge of causal forces. It's scientific knowledge of cause and effect. And the third is phronesis, 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 which is practical wisdom or prudence. The fourth is techne, as in technique, technician, craft knowledge. There is an intellectual virtue of understanding how to make things well, being an artist, right? So techne is the Greek word for art. And then the final one is nous, N-O-U-S. I'm so fascinated by this that Aristotle would identify nous as an intellectual virtue. Nous means intuition. Whoa! In what sense is intuition an intellectual virtue? It's actually really interesting. He says that nous operates both in the realm of the particular and in the abstract. I think we all intuitively understand when you say, well, I know that I know that I know that. What are you talking about? Well, there's an end of account giving. When rationally, because we have limited intellect, there's a point at which you can't give a further account of something, right? And so faith is just saying, well, I know it's true. Why do you know it's true? God's word said it's true. And, you know, the Spirit bears witness. And, well, why? It's faith. So, nous operates in the arena of the abstract, but Aristotle also points out that nous also operates in the realm of the particular. And that's what really interests me. I'm a casuist. Casus, Latin for case. Casuistry is case reasoning. Pastors, one of the standing items on their Winkle meetings is casuistry. They'll bring a case that's pressing, that's difficult, and doesn't admit of easy answers, and they'll talk through it as clinicians, more or less, you know. Pastoral care in difficult cases, what's the right thing to do, where the right thing is debatable. That's casuistry in a nutshell. And it comes from rhetorical reasoning. My mentor, Albert Johnson, from the University of Washington School of Medical History and Ethics, was Jesuitically trained, and he taught me casuistry. And he wrote an article that said that, in essence, casuistry is a mode of rhetorical reasoning. Here's all that means. I'm throwing out a lot of, please don't let the vocabulary scare you off, because let me tell you that everything I teach about this is based on how human beings think, reason, make decisions, and draw inferences. So it's natural. But there are a lot of Greek terms involved, and there are a lot of concepts from Aristotle, Plato, and so forth. Cicero, Quintilian. So, it's simpler than it sounds. And in essence, casuistry could just be understood as a guide to decision making amongst a gathering. Okay? Because difficult decisions are murky, because there is a potentially limitless parade of particulars that cloud the issue at stake. And until you resolve that, then decision making is difficult. And different people can look at it in a different light, and it's not quite clear. So you need to make it clear. And casuistry is a process of determining relevance of competing issues, principles, facts, motives, scriptural principles, and so on. And in medical ethics, legal precedents, and so forth. Well, now in the administration of schools, legal precedents very important, unfortunately. So, the Rhetorical Intelligence Project is based on the general idea of multiple intelligences. And I teach that in light of the dianoetic virtues that are articulated by Aristotle in both the Analytics and the Nicomachean Ethics, Book 6. And they are Sophia, Episteme, phronesis, techne, and nous. I just realized where I left off. Nous, Aristotle says, interestingly, he makes intuition into an intellectual virtue. And nous, he says, operates in the realm of the abstract, or the general, or the universal, actually, is what he said. But it also operates in the realm of the particular. And then I got into explaining casuistry. I'm sorry, I'm not a linear person. Don't expect that, and you'll be just fine. But I always remember where I did get off track. I got off track because I wanted to explain to you that casuistry is a great illustration of rhetorical intelligence. Learning to listen well to others who have different perspectives than you, and pooling your wisdom, phronesis, practical wisdom, pooling your wisdom and identifying where principles come to bear on the immediate decision, and what precedents are relevant, and which of the competing issues are relevant, until the crux of the matter becomes clear and there's a consensus amongst the group that you've got an accurate picture of the crux of the matter, and then decision making is pretty clear. So all of the thought processes that go into that, all of the intellectual abilities that go into the exercise of rhetorical reasoning is A, that's what I did for my doctoral dissertation. B, I learned it from a medical ethics professor and got the opportunity to sit in on medical ethics committees' deliberations, and then I recorded them, transcribed their discussion, and identified rhetorical elements within their talk. And that's my methodology. It's a grammar of rhetorical reasoning, is what my doctoral dissertation is. And it's based on the casuistic analysis of actual cases in the one I did my doctoral dissertation on was a baby that was born extremely prematurely to a crack-abusing mother who was going to have an abortion but didn't get around to it. And it's a really, really tragic and interesting case. So I started to tell you that because if you think about a situation or a scenario that's not a hypothetical, but it's an actual case, maybe even a life and death situation, and you have all of this particularity, and you have to determine which of these issues are most relevant and where are decision points, and and you have to negotiate that with people who have valid points of view, and this all matters. It's not a coin toss, and you have to make a decision that's defensible in court of law if necessary. So it really does matter, but it is managing a lot of relativity. But it's legitimate relativity that has to do with operating in the gray area and trying to be responsible and ethical about it. So it all matters quite a bit, I think. And so Aristotle said that nous operates. I'm going to take a third shot at this. I'm sorry if you're taking notes. Aristotle said that intuition operates in the realm of the particular because some things you just know are relevant, and there's a point at which rational account giving comes to an end. Now, think about this. Mr. C is going to love this. I know he is. It's coniglio, right? Or conilio. When your students are giving speeches and you have to grade them, how do you determine whether or not a speech is a B plus or an A minus? How many factors go into your decision?
Well,
If you can tick them off.
You've got to cover what their speech is about, their style of presentation.
How engaging they are.
how engaging. They stand still and use their good things. But mainly, if they really got the point of whatever the speech was about, did they get it across?
Yeah. How do you know if they're engaging? On what do you base that decision?
Part of that is if they keep me engaged, and if they keep the classmates engaged.
Okay. How can you tell if the classmates are engaged? This could go on for how long? One grade,
Yeah.
how many factors? Here's another way I like to illustrate it with my students. Peyton Manning hits someone 60 yards down the field with a strong crosswind, and someone has their hand in his face, and he hits the guy on stride. How do you do that? And how many calibrations and recalibrations and judgment calls and how long does it take for those to happen? That's what Aristotle was talking about. Nous operates in the realm of the particular because there are things that are so complex and involve so many particulars that you can't account for them all rationally. There's just too much going on. So I think that's really interesting. And I think the interplay of practical wisdom and shared moral inquiry is questioning your way down. It's dialectic. Questioning your way down to the crux of the matter. It's not random questions. It's following the line of argument till you get to the seat of the argument, and then searching for contradictions. But when you're involved in a group context like an ethics committee, you conduct shared inquiry together. You're pooling your wisdom and you're trying to act responsibly on behalf of another. Okay, so that's the context within which this rhetorical intelligence project is, going to be of use to people in patient care, in in situations where they're dealing with complex matters. In the business arena, I have plans to do some consulting in project management, because project managers have to deal with a lot of complexity a lot of time, and they work in teams, and they have to learn to ask the right question of the right person at the right time. And so there's a lot of real world application here. I'm looking forward to doing a catechism on casuistry for pastors, with pastors. I want to formulate. If that intrigues you, let me know, because I've been asking people. The last person I really thought we were going to do it was Dan Burhop over at Boulder. Anyway, the Rhetorical Intelligence Project is based on my understanding of rhetorical reasoning as an application of practical reasoning in tough cases, and it is a means of working through tough cases systematically. Oh, I already had this open. Oh well, it's too late now. And so what I want to talk to you about, it's not rhetoric and dialectic. It's rhetorical reasoning. Okay. This is the rhetoricring.com. It's my website, and this is the page devoted to rhetorical reasoning. And this is where it's my repository of all the essays that I parted out for my doctoral dissertation that will become a book, hopefully by 2020, that will launch this rhetorical intelligence project. let me walk you through this today. And I'll try to, I forgot your first name.
Mike?
Yes. Renee was asking me about Sturm's quote there. I'll try to give you some good nuts and bolts. I know this is very lofty, and if you're a grammar school teacher, I'm really not saying anything that you're going to find that useful. I'll try to conclude with that in about a half an hour. But Sturm says that the aim of education is a wise and eloquent piety. And I think the gift that I have to give to the Consortium for Classical Lutheran Education is how to teach dialectic and rhetoric in tandem to cultivate wisdom and eloquence. And so I'll talk about that at the end here. But that's not the rhetorical reasoning part of rhetorical intelligence. That's rhetoric as techne. Eloquence is rhetoric as techne. Right? Craft knowledge. It has to do with crafting speeches. Everybody knows about that, I would guess. The art of crafting speeches. That's the techne aspect of rhetoric. But think about this. If you're in court of law, or mock court, and you have to go work with a team to determine the most powerful case you can construct together, you can craft together, what do you have to do first? You have to inquire into the crux of the matter, because those arguments are most powerful that most clearly address the crux of the matter, right? That's common sense. And so it's rhetorical reasoning is the ability to reason down to the crux of the matter that precedes the techne of argumentation. You want me to say that again?
Yep.
Rhetorical reasoning is the process of inquiring into the crux of the matter that precedes the art of argumentation. That's the techne of rhetoric. That's what everybody knows about rhetoric. But the people I study claim that, I might have it on, yeah. I'll just read this. For much of history, the dunamis tautherosai of rhetoric has been left to chance or native ability. The power of inquiry, the power of invention, which is the Greek word for invention is heuresis. And a heuristic is promptuary. It asks questions. Questioning until you get to the seat of the argument to see if the first principles upon which the argument rests are sound. Okay? So the dunamis, the power or faculty of inquiring, of rhetoric, has been left to chance or native ability. And the techne aspect of rhetoric has been privileged so that invention has been associated primarily with building arguments and neglected as a means of inquiry. Have I said enough previously that makes sense to you? I don't want to leave anybody here. Yes?
It makes a little bit of sense. To me. That a lot of textbooks that I've seen in my limited familiarity with it is that they're using books like, argument building. Is that could be falling more under the
techne, yes.
aspect? But what needs to precede that is an understanding of the nous aspect of that. Is that true? My understanding?
No, there's no connection between the nous and except that if you're building a brilliant argument, say, and you're using some kind of very vivid illustration that have you ever heard somebody make an illustration that tickles the rear lobe of your brain, and it's so sublime that you just, you're smitten.
Sure.
It moves you. It enchants you. So I would say nous would play a role in creating discourse that is sublime or a sermon that is sublime. Yes. But
That's not rhetorical reasoning.
rhetorical reasoning involves nous. When you get to the bottom line and you realize when you're in an ethics committee, someday I'm going to attend some pastoral casuistry sessions so I can use those to illustrate, but maybe you can help me with that. But when you're trying to figure out what is the right thing to do, and you only have 45 minutes, otherwise it's too late for action. Action is the aim, not contemplation of principles. Responsible action, ethical action. How do you know when you've exhausted a topic and gotten to the end of a line of inquiry? Usually you'll hit upon a maxim. Now I'm actually into parsing out the items on this page. So I guess I'll just start in on that now. The grammar of rhetorical reasoning begins first with topical logic. Topoi, topics. Topos, as in topographical map. Topoi, which is the plural of topos, which are topics, is a central doctrine in rhetorical theory. And that's what prompts questions. Another way to speak of them are issues. They issue from the case, and they are topics that prompt questions that guide inquiry into the crux of the matter. Does that make sense to you? Any debaters? Does anyone know about debate? Have you heard of the stock issues model? The stock issues model is a collection of topics that prompt questions about the proposed course of action that's under debate. So the case that you construct for your debate case addresses these topics, the stock issues. But before you construct your case, you use the stock issues to inquire into the nature of the case at hand. That's the rhetorical reasoning part. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I kind of got off a little bit.
You got off.
Well, I'm a little behind.
I'm not on anything as far as I know.
I was just curious about deep rhetoric and surface rhetoric and how that applies to kind of what you're talking about. I mean, does that matter? Because then you could use your goose.
Where did you get this terminology?
I was a speech major,
Where?
Blackhill State University.
Charles Follett is my mentor.
Are you serious? He's a mentor of mine as well.
In my book,
Oh my goodness.
of Rhetoric and Redemption in La Rioja, I acknowledge Charles in the...
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. We can't cover that here. We have to have a beer and many hours. Yeah. Okay. I can't... This is just going to baffle everybody else. Please forgive me. We have a common mentor. The deep rhetoric is very important in the cultural role of rhetoric. I could give an equally confusing session on the cultural role of rhetoric, but this is the bottom line. What's your name? Karina. You know, Charles, that was his favorite topic. The cultural role of rhetoric, and this all comes from Richard Weaver, by the way, if you were in Dr. Kopp's session. This is from Richard Weaver, too. He did his dissertation on Richard Weaver, so we're all Weaver junkies. But the deep rhetoric is the core that William Butler Yeats refers to in The Second Coming, that the center no longer holds. Cultural cohesion is what binds us together as a society, social bonds. And the common, taken for granted assumptions are the deep rhetoric. It's what you believe is right when you're not talking about what's right. You talk from them, not about them. And so the cultural role of rhetoric the cultural role of rhetoric is really important. I talked to my 7th and 8th graders about this too, but it was very, very distilled version of it. But when you are attempting to argue for a position and you want somebody to embrace your point of view, which we do when we speak the truth in love to our neighbor, you can't spell out all of your premises because it's too pedantic to do so. So we don't speak in syllogisms. What do we speak in?
What do you mean response?
Yes. It's a syllogism that's missing one of its propositions. It's left unstated or taken for granted. Enthymeme. A synonym for deep rhetoric is the enthymematic base. You remember that? I was trying to take you on a walk down memory lane.
A long time.
Okay.
Would you mind repeating that word?
Which one? Enthymematic base. Enthymeme. E-N-T-H-Y-M-E-M-E. Anyway, enthymemes are when people don't state all of their premises because some of the premises need to just be taken for granted. Or, another way to look at it, shared between auditor and orator. That builds a bond in meaning making. You supply the missing premise. We have a shared understanding of things, and that replenishes that core by rehearsing it. It has a lot to do with do this in remembrance of me. It's the familiar forms, the path that we are on over and over and over until we get habituated, and that's related to the well-ordered, the ordering of the soul and the affections. So I'm trying to link that to what's been being said here. But anyway, the deep rhetoric goes in a completely different direction, but being proficient in rhetorical reasoning, if there's a critical mass in society that can utilize the methods that are actually based on observations about how human beings make meaning and shared values and how we infer conclusions from premises and all of that sort of thing, ultimately that will all come together as far as the core values that are shared and how you communicate from those core values about particular questions that are up for discussion.
That's where news comes in.
Yeah, well, nous comes in at various stages of the whole operation. Sir, you had your hand up. I'm sorry this is so confusing. I completely set myself up for this, but we're going to make sense out of this. When does the session end? I only know when they start. I don't pay attention to when they end.
3:05? Is that something?
It ends at 3:05? Okay, sir.
I was just wondering whether that deep rhetoric you were talking about for the professional Lutherans would be the liturgy.
No. The liturgy is the surface rhetoric. It's remember the drawing with the hourglass and the surface, and then below the surface, the roots of the liturgy would be the deep rhetoric. The liturgy is formulated from common theological. That's why we have worship wars, because there are entirely different presuppositions held in contemporary worship. And so traditional liturgical worship holds a different deep rhetoric. Makes sense? So it surfaces in a different style. Actually, that was what his whole dissertation was about. The style is influenced by the deep rhetoric. So, for example, if I, in my rhetoric, have a tendency to use lots of biblical allusions, that presupposes that I value very highly Scripture, and it has authority in my thought process. And style is an index to my deep rhetoric, my taken for granted presuppositions. Okay, I didn't get to this yet, so I'm just going to say very quickly, this is my grammar of rhetorical reasoning based on the case that I mentioned to you, that I recorded and flowed out on my office. I had tagboard all around my office, and I ended up with 12 different tagboard sheets where all the contributions of all the players in the room were spelled out. And every time I saw phronesis surface in the discussion, I would highlight that in green. If I saw topical logic operating, that was pink, and so on and so forth. I had all these color-coded transcript of the discussion, and it was all designed to identify topical logic, practical wisdom, stasis, points of stasis. Kinesis is motion, kinetic energy. Stasis is motion at rest. It has to do with points at issue. Progress in the case stops until you resolve that issue, and then motion can continue. Motion at rest, stasis. Maxims come into play here too. Dialectical inference comes into play. Dialectical inference would be the question asking that's motivated by the topical logic. And as you ask the series of questions, the practical wisdom surfaces as people try to ascribe degrees of relevance to the issues raised. That sounds really mechanical, doesn't it? But when you try to analyze common sense reasoning processes, that's what you end up with. It's really, really tedious. And that's a very tedious essay, but it has lots of examples of discourse from medical ethicists, the attending physician, the nurses present, the clergy. Okay? So it's kind of interesting that way. And then this, toward a rhetorical ethics, there's a lot of ethics involved in this as well. And so the implications of viewing rhetorical reasoning as I propose to in my rhetorical intelligence project has a lot of implications. For example, rhetoricians really celebrate relativity. It's their temperament. And that's why they get in trouble, and that's why we don't trust them for the most part. People like me are very few and far between. So if you propose to have a methodology that has been defined and universalized and stabilized to the same extent as the scientific method, they're gonna reject that out of hand. They don't like that because they see that as stultifying, and it would close off discussion to have that kind of uniformity. But the Rhetorical Intelligence Project is essentially an attempt to promote rhetorical reasoning to a methodology that's analogous to the scientific method. Because many of us realize in this room that prior to the Baconian and Cartesian revolutions, rhetoric was the architectonic art in Greco-Roman learning, right? It was the unifying art, and the methodology of reasoning rhetorically about issues was much more taken for granted. But interestingly, they never really spelled it out, except that I think Aristotle probably did in a book called the Methodica, which is lost. he has his analytics and his organon, his works on logic, and then there's the topica where he teaches dialectic. In the topica, he relates analytic reasoning, demonstrative reasoning, and dialectical reasoning one to another. In the rhetoric, his treatise on rhetoric, Aristotle does the same move, and he references the Methodica. And I think that's where he spelled out what I want to do with these essays. That's mentioned in here. This is all moving toward a book. These are going to be book chapters. And this is my favorite right here. This is a good article. These are all hot links. That's a good article. You should check it out, pastors. I'm going to be discussing that with Adam Hensley and Joanna Hensley in about 3 weeks on the web. But 5 facets of phronesis is my attempt to actually identify how does practical wisdom operate as people are engaged in shared moral inquiry and trying to determine what is the right thing to do where the right thing is debatable. And I found 5 different ways that it surfaces: applying principles, applying precedent, and nous, and that sort of thing. Well, I'm sorry that I rattled so much. I hope it started to make a little sense once I got to this page, and I hope you can fill in the blanks. And if you need to, we'll be going out for beer and talking about deep rhetoric, and another hour, and we'll have this thing licked, I'm pretty sure. Thank you so much.